This is a special bonus edition of Judaism Unbound, Queer Jewish Creativity. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lex Rofberg, and today we do not have a Dan here. Sometimes on our bonus episodes, we only have it so that one or the other of us is here. I hope you're not too sad. He sends his love, but we have a guest whose name is Reed Love, so we're just overflowing with love today, even though Dan sends his regards but can't be with us. So we are excited to have a conversation about a class that we are launching in the Anya Shiva very, very soon. It's one of 4 mini courses that we are offering this January. They start in mid-January, and so you should go and register for them. But Reed Love is teaching one of those 4 mini courses, and because they have not been a past guest of Judaism Unbound, and because we know that they're maybe a little less familiar to our listeners, to our students, than some of our other past teachers, we were like, let's have a bonus episode. So we're going to do that. And before we dive into the conversation about their class, which is called Cosmic Bodies, Celebrating Queer and Jewish Creativity, we are going to give you a little bit of some introduction to Reed Love. So Reed Love is a chaplain and has had a spiritual counseling, life cycle facilitation, and craniosacral therapy bodywork private practice for the past decade. I'll have to talk with you afterwards about what craniosacral means. That's a really cool adjective. With over 15 years of experience across Jewish movements and interfaith settings, Reed completed their chaplaincy residency at St. Mary's Medical Center, and Reed received their BA from Brandeis University in Women's and Gender Studies. They studied at Pardes and for 2 years at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies. Reed completed a master's degree in Judaic Studies specializing in Jewish values, ethics, and action from the Academy of Jewish Religion of California. Reed founded We Are Stardust, an LGBTQ plus spiritual lab rooted in creative practice, which you can learn more about at wearestardust.org. So Reed Love, thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to have you on this bonus episode of the podcast.
Oh my goodness, thank you for having me. I am thrilled to be here.
Us too. So let's dive straight into it. Let's figure out Cosmic Bodies. What is this class, Cosmic Bodies, Celebrating Queer and Jewish Creativity, and why does it exist in the world? What made you, of all the things, because I'll break the fourth wall. When we were talking about possible courses, there were many possibilities, and you ended up landing on this one. And so I want to hear, like, what's the passion behind it, and also just what is it?
Oh my goodness, Cosmic Bodies. When I was 28, I decided to pursue chaplaincy after a couple years of rabbinical school. I was working in the ER, tending to patients, offering prayer, spiritual counseling, and I found myself actually that very next day in the emergency room myself. So I was in a severe car accident, head injury, lots of pain. In my 20s, had to go through this process of discovering that I had a body, A, B, that my inherent worth was not tied to what I produce, right? So, and this was not something that I really knew. I mean, I think so much of my life I was kind of, bringing my body with me, of course, but really this was such a deep healing. And I actually I wasn't able to work again for another 1.5 years. And in the meantime, was able to really dive into studies of like, what is this thing that is in need of such care and tending and healing? As you mentioned, I've had a craniosacral practice, and that actually was one of the modalities that I feel really brought so much healing, clarity, and deeper understanding of what this system is, not only what it is, but also how I can relate to it in a deeper way. What is the connection between spirituality and our bodies? And I think queer people are some of the most creative people. We're constantly using our imagination to create spaces that don't exist, create realities that don't exist. And I think that bringing all of those things together with a Jewish lens is just a lot of fun.
So to hone in on it a little bit, craniosacral, I want to make sure I understand this very cool 5 syllables. So cranio, what I get from that is, I guess, cranio-brainio. cranium, and I don't mean to sound condescending. I just I want to break this term down. Brain stuff
Got it.
is my best association with that sort of mind, to use a word that, maybe is the relevant one here, maybe not. I'll learn more from you in a second. And then we've got sacral, which, sacred, sacral. But it seems to hint to me at something much deeper, which is very up our Judaism Unbound alley. The blurring of a binary that is unhelpful in Jewish life and beyond, of mind on the one hand and heart on the other. Sacral, sacred is something I think we associate with emotion and heart and, love, and cranium, brain, that points to intellect. And we like to separate intellect and emotion. But the sense I get from talking to you and from learning more about this class is that you and I share a mission in the world of trying to blur that mind-heart duality. And it's not only a duality, it's kind of a triality, because we got to throw body in there, because that's, of course, the core theme. So can you give us a little more about what is this class going to bring on those legs of mind and heart and body, which may actually be more intertwined than we think?
Intertwined indeed. And, what you said about love is exactly it. And I think, it can sound corny, and then you get to the next depth layer of what divine love is and how do we open our hearts. And I think so much of it is sometimes being cracked open. We actually ran this course. We Are Stardust ran this curriculum a year and a half ago. We got a grant to create something that hadn't been done before. We wanted to focus on unmapped Jews, folks who, weren't members of the synagogue, people who, weren't actively participating in Jewish life. We ran a teen cohort internationally online, and we ran an adult cohort, and we had ages 18 to the 80s. And it was, gosh, talk about a loving space. Ever been in a class where there's just that air, it's thick with creativity, and you could feel people's minds and hearts. There's a buzz. That is exactly what we do, what we're going for. And the first session, we were really focused on awe, just engaging with something with a creative curiosity, a sense of, what is that? I wonder about that. How interesting. And awe also connecting to, right? Yirah in Hebrew also means fear. So what's going on there, right? When you're standing in awe of something. Isn't it amazing, right? You think of the bathroom prayer that people, sometimes say of how many things go right? How many things go right? How amazing is that? Wow, so many mechanisms need to happen for me to use the facilities, right? The second session, we look at our bodies through the lens of joy, Gila in Hebrew. Use different texts throughout our time together. And that can be poetry, Jewish, morsels, gems. And it's also multi-faith and other, bell hooks we have. We have, Yiddish proverbs. We have a wide array of different entry points to create, whether they're bringing their glitter library and just fun collages, or if they are knitting a crochet sweater, or some people are writers and they're just in their craft. Some people they never made art in their whole lives, but they're just kind of curious what that is, and they want to be in a space like that. It's really wonderful. And then the last one, as you mentioned, is about love. And I also want to say that this is aspirational. How many of us love our bodies? Part of what we are doing is holding prayerful, creative space that holds our goals, our hopes, and queer self-love is radical. And it is something in this culture that we are cultivating, and that affects everyone. That ripples out.
Yeah, I think that's so important to name. I mean, what you haven't said yet directly, although I'm sensing it both in the class description, judaismunbound.com/classes, everyone, and in your words here, this feels like an intervention. And I don't mean that in a negative, I mean that in a really positive, important way. The world is one that needs classes that have the subtitle Celebrating Queer X. Pick your X. We live in a world that does not always or mostly celebrate queerness, and that's historically and today deeply true around bodies. And so I'd really love to hear more about what's the intervention that this class is sort of bringing to the world, because I think we need to say the quiet parts out loud here. We need to be direct that, like, this is a wonderful gift of a class, but it's also like we're in a world that needs this, and there are people whose lives will or will not be harmed based on whether work like this, not just our class, obviously, but like based on whether there is empowerment of queer folks and whether there is or is not a successful shift in how people relate to queer bodies. Can you talk a little bit about some of the politics of that? So, like, what is this class part of as a broader movement? What do we need to change in terms of how non-queer folks stigmatize and treat gender expansive bodies?
Absolutely. And, you know, when I was born in the Central Valley of California, where most of our food comes from, grapes, wine, corn, you know, there were no out people. It was when I was 18 and went away to college to Massachusetts to Brandeis, aka Brandykes, and met my first out queer person. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I think about all of the different people. I mean, in the past year, just 2023 alone, there have been 500 anti-LGBTQ legislations that have been introduced. Not necessarily all of them have passed, but just there's such an enormous energy going to not have queer people in the public or queer people just being alive, really, basically. Part of the way that I understand this work with We Are Stardust is exactly that we are all so important, that we are all part of this wild ride of life, that we need each other. We need everyone's magic. In the work that I've been doing specifically with queer and trans youth, having a place for people to process, to bring their pain, to bring their grief. But this is also, like, let's be clear, like, this is a place of celebration, right? Like, there's so many queer and trans spaces that, like, we hold as places of grief. And let me tell you, like, I work as a hospice chaplain. Like, I spend a lot of time, like, at the bedside with people who are dying. I run the bereavement program where I work. It's all connected, right? Like, our greatest grief and our love, it's all one. And so many queer spaces are spaces, you know, Trans Day of Remembrance, like, we're remembering, gosh, all the people maybe that were murdered this past year or took their lives, or, you know, my dream is for there to be more spaces where people come in and they leave feeling empowered to share their passions and their joys, and also a sense of greater connection to people who are also doing that, and also to the divine. A lot of LGBT people feel that they have not been able to find a comfortable place within religion, within spirituality, that it doesn't include them. And I want this to feel like an invitation that, you know, if they understand, you know, their connection to spirituality as connection to water, or like the basic elements, or the ocean, or whatever it may be, that is exactly 100% amazing, right? They don't have to change who they are. People can just arrive exactly how they are, find community, love, and acceptance. That is our ultimate dream.
So I'd love to get a little bit of a window into, for lack of a better term, the Jewish text angle. Give us a sense, like, give us a spoiler. We love spoilers, spoiler alerts on this podcast. What's a taste of maybe a kind of Jewish tradition or text that relates to the conversation the cosmic body is going to be having?
We started it off talking about craniosacral therapy and how I had an injury to my spine a decade ago and sent me on this whole course of healing. I remember sitting in the yeshiva in Jerusalem at Pardes with a fresh Talmud cracked open in the Stender and reading in Masechet Brachot that when one should pray, they should bow with all 18 vertebrae of their spine. And I remember thinking, what? This is amazing. They're talking about my spine and how I need to move my body. And, I had probably been sitting in that chair for 5 hours and hadn't moved my spine very much, which is kind of strange to think about. But I always remember that feeling of feeling myself invited into the room. The rabbis had considered how I should move, that I should move. When I was recovering, I remember, learning about the spine, the muscles of the spine, the ligaments, and the incredible mechanisms that are so complex and just most of the time work without us having to think about it at all. And my massage teacher saying that our issues are in the tissues, which is very true, right? Our issues are in our tissues, and that every vertebrae tells a story. And I think, wow, what is the story of my spine? We talked about the sacrum, which is the first bone that is formed in our bodies. It's the oldest bone in our body, in utero. It's formed. There is so much magic in our bodies. That's just one example of this mechanism that we use to experience life and how beautiful, sometimes tragic, but also how incredible. Even our spine is a miracle in itself.
I love that story about Brandeis and how you're just like, this is amazing. This is so great. One of my core role models in the world was my uncle. He's no longer alive, but he was one of, or maybe the first teacher in Massachusetts who came out in the late 70s as gay. And before he did that, he marched in the Boston Pride Parade multiple times. And one of the early times he marched with a paper bag over his head. And he was, as a way of showing like he was a teacher and he was not yet out, and he knew that if he were to come out, there would be serious consequences. He was right, by the way. When he came out, he was fired, even from his like fairly liberal Massachusetts suburban Boston school. Then, at a different point, I believe I'm getting the chronology right, he marched in the Boston Pride Parade with a sign that just said, "Gay is excellent." And to me, that and he devoted a lot of his work. He spent a lot more time writing and talking about how awesome queerness is than he did about like his experience getting fired or various ways that he's been stigmatized. Like, I think that's so important. And not that we don't need those spaces of commemoration, of memory, of tragedy marking. We 100% do. And I think this class will have space for that. But I wanted to name that I so appreciate that framing. But in terms of your class, another side of it that I wanted to ask about is there's a variety of different kinds of people who could take this class. Early on in some of our communications about it, we received some notes from people that were like, this looks cool. I'm not LGBTQ plus myself, but like solidarity to this class, it's so great. And I think they were under the impression that this wasn't a class for them. And there are spaces that are specifically for queer folks to be with other queer folks. This is a space that is open to people of any gender identity, of any sexual orientation, including folks who are straight. And so I guess I wanted, as a closing note, to hear from you, like, what are the different kinds of things that people will emerge from this class with? And maybe how might that be overlapping and different simultaneously for the categories like folks who are themselves queer, but also what are the ways in which straight folks should think about taking this class and not see it just as like, oh, I'm glad that space exists, but it's not for me.
Totally. I have also gotten notes from people who, say I'm a Jewish creative, and I don't. Is this just a primary LGBTQ space? I will say that this is a LGBTQ anchored space, and everyone is welcome. At this point, we all, I'm guessing many of us, know someone or love someone in our family who is LGBTQ. And honestly, I think people are really craving, queer spaces. Queer, what does even a queer space mean? I think maybe sometimes people can think of like, when you look at art, you look at film, you look at music, LGBTQ people are often at the center of some of that creative exploration. Specifically naming this as an LGBTQ space is a way of celebrating queerness, of celebrating transness, of gender expansiveness. And I think part of what we're trying to do is create a culture change. I think folks are really excited to be part of that. Straight people, cis people are wanting to be part of something new. Judaism is always changing, is always developing, unfolding, and to be part of that magical changing essence, people are in, they're down, they want something new. And I think this is one of those spaces where we get to plug in to, Julia Cameron from The Artist's Way is someone that I really gleaned a lot of inspiration from, that the inner artist is the inner child, is also our soul.
Thank you so much, Reed, for joining us. This has been a fantastic and important conversation.
Thanks for having me, and so excited for this class. Can't wait to meet all the folks out there who are coming.
Same. I am unbelievably excited for this class to take place. As a reminder, judaismunbound.com/classes. That's where you can go to learn about this class and about all of our other mini courses coming up. So go ahead, podcast listener. Don't be shy. judaismunbound.com/classes. You're going to love it there. The water is great. It's not even just fine. It's excellent. So sign up for Reed Love's amazing class. And we're excited to have you. If you're a new Onion Shiva student, if you're a returning Onion Shiva student, you are welcome. So we hope that you've enjoyed this little bit of a window into cosmic bodies celebrating queer and Jewish creativity. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.